So now we want to dive into what does generative AI mean for courts and judges in particular. So, Bridget, I'm just going to open by asking you generally to share some of your thoughts about courts and AI.
Yeah, and again, we're gonna get through a little bit of this today, and then we'll continue this conversation probably in our next episode, and many more after that. In some ways, I think this technology is really exciting for courts because of the ways in which it can help them build tools and services that are really hard to do with humans, given their budgets and all of the constraints. So there really is a ton of upside potential. And then there's lots of concern and fear and worry among court leaders about the ways in which they're not going to be able to keep up with the technology. So I've been doing a lot of presenting to judges and courts and court teams, court administrators on this topic. And it's usually pretty 101, the presentations they're interested in, which is good for me because, I feel good at 101 and not necessarily 201. So 101's about right. But they're very curious, I would say. All of the courts I've presented to, and I've now done these presentations in many states, usually to the appellate courts or the state Supreme Courts, and sometimes to the entire judicial body that governs the administrative process. And we've seen lots of court orders, some early ones that were sort of pretty aggressive about banning all use of generative AI by lawyers in proceedings, and then some more nuanced ones, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But for the most part, I think courts are both nervous about the ways in which this technology might upset their processes, the ways in which they are going to have a hard time keeping up with the technology to be able to, meet the demand that they might see, and where they're going to get the learning or the technologists to help them. I was at a presentation recently with an appellate court of a state, all of the appellate judges of the state, and they had their information, they had their engineering lead there, and even their chief technology officer had not had any experimentation with the technology. And I don't think that was because he wasn't curious. He certainly was. I think there was a lack of resources, a lack of education, a lack of information, which are things that are difficult for courts in every way, but are perhaps most difficult with new technology. So lots of, I think, concern out there.
What do you perceive to be the difference between courts where you're presenting and the concern drives sort of the behavior, and courts where you're presenting where some of the optimism and the excitement, once we can figure out how to channel resources in its direction, prevails?
Yeah, that's the really interesting thing. And in some ways, this is just like the latest example of, courts where you see innovation and courts where you see, very little innovation. So, we saw lots of innovation in certain courts throughout the pandemic. And you do see that now. There's the Maricopa County Court is building these chatbots for self-represented litigants using this technology. And it's a game changer, right? I mean, those were all the questions that used to come to one human or maybe two. I don't know how many people they have able to answer the public's questions. There's now an unlimited number of AIs that can answer them, right? And you can really train them in specific areas in a way that's a really wonderful public service. So you see that. There's David Slayton, who's the court administrator in LA County, is partnering with the team at Stanford to try and figure out how to redesign what courts should be for the public who needs them. And he views this technology as a huge game changer for what they might be able to do for the people that they serve. I had a conversation with the current Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court last week. She's hiring new clerks. She has 3 new clerks coming in. She specifically hired people who were eager to play with generative AI tools and technology to improve the work of the courts. So you do see those examples. They're rare, and I would say the difference between a court that's showing leaning into innovation around this technology and those that aren't is usually a person, a leader, either a court administrator or a chief judge or a chief justice who views this technology as an opportunity to do more or do better than the alternative. And lawyers, judges are lawyers, and lawyers are skeptical by nature and risk adverse by training. We come by all that honestly. So it's not surprising that it's unusual when you see somebody leaning into technology like this that's, none of us really fully understand yet.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting because, as you mentioned, like one of the challenges of the moment for everybody is finding the talent on the technology side to help figure out how to use this well. But the human leadership piece is so key. I see it in law firms a lot when I'm traveling, that you see firms where there's a huge amounts of skepticism among leadership versus those that understand the limitations but are optimistic. We see it in law schools with personalities that are really open to driving innovation and those that aren't. And it really becomes contagious across the organization and then can permeate into the field. And I watched this with you personally, and you were one of the most innovative Supreme Court justices in the country during the pandemic. And I remember watching it in a conversation you had with another judge, and the other judge said, it never actually occurred to me that we could try these things. And so, I've seen it take place, and I've seen the excitement and enthusiasm of like, I love what Bridget's doing. I think that's really cool, and I want to follow it.
I think there are lots of people doing far more innovative things than I've ever done, but they really are people led. It is interesting. You're right. It's the same in law firms. It's probably the same in every other organization. It's if your leadership team is leaning in, I bet your whole organization gets excited, and that's when you find all kinds of new and better ways of doing what you do as a result of the technology.
Yeah, it's somebody in power telling you that it's okay to experiment and try that really drives change. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.